only daughter helped a frozen Hell's Angel. Next day, 2,000 riders showed up outside her house. The wind howled against Lena's old Toyota as she navigated the dark country road, her headlights cutting through the thickening snowfall. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white with tension. The heater wheezed weakly, barely keeping up with the February chill that had settled over their small town. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:47 p.m. Her evening shift at the campus library had run late again, and her mother would be waiting up, probably sitting in her familiar spot by the kitchen window with her well-worn Bible and a cup of chamomile tea. The thought of her mother brought both warmth and worry to Lena's heart. Since Dad's passing 3 years ago, their little household had shrunk to just the two of them, and their routines had become as predictable as the seasons. Maria would wait up no matter how many times Lena insisted she shouldn't, and tomorrow morning, they'd share quiet conversation over coffee before heading to their respective jobs. Snow was falling harder now, coating the road in treacherous white. Lena leaned forward, straining to see through her windshield as the wipers fought against the accumulating snow. The familiar landmarks she usually relied on, mailboxes, fence posts, old barns, had become ghostly shapes in the darkness. "Just 5 more miles," she whispered to herself, a habit she'd picked up during these solitary drives. The radio crackled with static before falling silent altogether, leaving her alone with the sound of tires crunching through fresh snow and the persistent howl of the wind. Her thoughts drifted to the stack of social work textbooks in her passenger seat. Tomorrow's classes seemed far away in this weather, but she couldn't help thinking about the case studies they'd been discussing. Her professor's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the most important moments in social work happen outside the office, in unexpected places. The beam of her headlights swept across the empty Rusty's Gas and Go station, its windows dark and shuttered for the night. But something caught her eye. A dark shape huddled against the concrete wall beside the closed garage bay. At first, she thought it might be a pile of garbage or abandoned boxes. Then she saw it move. Barely. Lena's foot eased off the accelerator, her heart beginning to pound. Through the swirling snow, she could make out more details. The bulk of a leather jacket, the gleam of chrome from a motorcycle partially buried in the growing snowdrift, and the unmistakable skull patches that marked the rider's affiliations. The figure slumped forward slightly, a motion that seemed more like surrender than intention. No other vehicles were in sight, just an empty road stretching into darkness in both directions, the gas station's security light casting weak yellow shadows across the scene. Lena's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as she slowed the car further. The biker wasn't moving much now, and what little movement she could see seemed uncoordinated. Even from here, she could tell something was terribly wrong. The snow was piling up around him like a frozen shroud, and his motorcycle looked like it had been there for hours. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, "If someone is freezing, you don't ask who they are." It was something he'd said years ago, when he'd brought a homeless man home during another winter storm. The lesson had stuck with her, but now, faced with this moment of decision, fear and compassion waged a silent war in her heart. The biker's head drooped lower, and Lena saw his gloved hand fall limply to his side. Lena pulled her car to the side of the road, emergency lights blinking weakly through the curtain of snow. Her hands trembled as she zipped her coat up to her chin and pulled her woolen hat down over her ears. The moment she opened her car door, the bitter wind stole her breath away. The snow crunched under her boots as she made her way toward the slumped figure. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step. Up close, the biker was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders made even wider by his leather jacket. The skull patches on his vest seemed to glow eerily in the dim security light, marking him as a member of a notorious motorcycle club. "Sir?" Her voice sounded small against the howling wind. "Sir, are you all right?" He didn't respond. His head remained bowed, long gray hair frozen with ice crystals. His breathing was shallow and irregular. She could see the faint puffs of air in the cold. Lena crouched down beside him, her social work training kicking in. "I'm going to check if you're okay," she said clearly, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. She touched his hand. The leather glove was stiff with ice. His skin, where she could see it around his neck, had taken on a frightening pale color. His lips had a bluish tinge that made her stomach clench with worry. These were the signs of hypothermia she'd learned about in her first aid course. The biker's eyes flickered open briefly, pale blue, unfocused. He mumbled something incomprehensible and tried to push her away, but his movements were weak and uncoordinated. Lena pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, but the no signal message mocked her from the screen. The storm had knocked out reception, as it often did in these rural areas. She looked up and down the empty road. No headlights, no signs of help coming. "I'm going to help you into my car," she said firmly, even as fear fluttered in her chest. "You'll freeze to death if you stay here." He muttered something that sounded like a protest, trying to wave her off, but his hand dropped limply back to his side. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself. The man was nearly twice her size, but he needed help now. She couldn't wait for someone else to come along. In this weather, that might not happen until morning. By then, it would be too late. She gripped his arm, trying to help him stand. "Please," she said, her voice stronger now. "You have to help me help you. Just a few steps to my car." The biker stirred, seeming to understand through his confusion. With tremendous effort, he pushed himself up the wall, leaning heavily against Lena. She staggered under his weight but kept her footing in the snow. Together, they shuffled through the deepening snow toward her car. His boots dragged, leaving long trails behind them. Every few steps, he would stumble, and Lena's muscles screamed with the effort of keeping him upright. The wind cut through her coat, and snow pelted her face, but she kept moving forward. When they finally reached her Toyota, Lena managed to get the passenger door open. The biker practically fell into the seat, his large frame barely fitting in the compact car. His eyes were closed again, his breathing shallow but steady. Lena quickly closed his door and hurried back to the driver's side, her mind racing. The roads to the hospital would be impassable in this weather, and she still had no phone signal to call for help. The headlights of Lena's Toyota cut through the swirling snow as she pulled into her driveway. The small house looked warm and inviting, with a single lamp still burning in the front window, her mother's signal that she was waiting up, as always. Lena turned off the engine and glanced at her passenger. The biker's breathing was still worryingly shallow, his skin ashen in the dim light. Ice crystals were melting in his gray beard, but he hadn't warmed up nearly enough during the drive. "I'll be right back," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. She hurried through the knee-deep snow to the front door, fumbling with her keys. Before she could unlock it, the door swung open. Maria stood there in her faded blue robe, worry etched across her face. "Mija, I was so worried. The storm is getting worse and—" Maria's words cut off as she spotted the unfamiliar car silhouette in the driveway. "What's wrong? Whose car is that?" "Mama, it's my car. I need your help," Lena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a man who needs our help. He was collapsed outside the gas station on Route 16. He's got hypothermia." Maria's eyes widened. "Did you call an ambulance?" No signal. The roads are impossible. He'll die if we don't help him. Lena grabbed her mother's hands. Please, Mama, he needs to get warm. Maria peered past her daughter into the darkness. Who is he? Lena hesitated. I don't know. He's a biker. He has patches. Dios mío. Maria crossed herself. A biker? Lena, no. Those men are dangerous. Call the police. The phones aren't working. Mama, and he's dying. Lena's voice cracked. Papa always said if someone is freezing. Don't! Maria's voice was sharp. Don't use your father's words to... A particularly fierce gust of wind howled around the house, making the windows rattle. Lena squeezed her mother's hands tighter. Please, just help me get him inside. Look at him first, then decide. Maria hesitated, then grabbed her coat from the hook. Together they walked to the car, snow crunching beneath their feet. Through the passenger window, they could see the biker's face illuminated by the porch light. His skin had taken on a waxy appearance, his lips still tinged with blue. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Santa Maria! See? He needs help now. Lena opened the passenger door, letting in a blast of cold air. The biker didn't stir. Maria stood frozen for a moment, her breath visible in small clouds. Lena recognized the internal struggle on her mother's face, the battle between fear and compassion. Finally, Maria's shoulders dropped slightly. Your father would never forgive me if I turned away someone dying in a storm, she said quietly. Then, more firmly, Bien, we'll bring him in. But I'm keeping my phone ready to call 911 the moment signals come back. Together they managed to half-carry, half-drag the large man through the snow and up the porch steps. He was barely conscious, mumbling incoherently as they guided him through the door. The warm air of the house hit them as they entered, and for the first time, Lena felt her own fingers and toes beginning to ache as they thawed. Maria quickly closed and locked the door behind them, shutting out the howling wind and swirling snow. Maria hurried to gather blankets while Lena helped the biker to their worn leather couch. His leather jacket was stiff with ice, and his gloved hands shook uncontrollably. The wind rattled the windows as snow continued to build up outside. We need to get him out of these frozen clothes, Lena said, reaching for his jacket. The biker weakly tried to push her hands away. Don't. His voice was barely a whisper. Sir, you have hypothermia. Please, let us help you. Lena kept her voice gentle but firm. She could feel her mother watching anxiously from the doorway. Maria appeared with a stack of blankets and her late husband's old clothes. Here, she said, setting them down carefully. Lena, go heat up some soup while I help him change. Lena hesitated, but her mother's expression had softened from fear to determination. In the kitchen, she could hear Maria speaking softly in Spanish, prayers mixed with gentle instructions as she helped the stranger out of his frozen clothes. The kitchen was warm and familiar as Lena heated a pot of her mother's homemade chicken soup. Steam rose from the pot, fogging the window above the sink. Through the glass, she could see the snow falling harder than ever. When she returned with a bowl of soup, the biker was wrapped in blankets, wearing her father's old flannel shirt and sweatpants. His own clothes lay in a wet heap by the door. He still hadn't removed his gloves. Can you hold the spoon? Lena asked, offering him the bowl. His hands shook too badly. Without a word, she sat beside him and began feeding him small spoonfuls of the hot soup. Maria watched from her armchair, rosary beads clicking softly between her fingers. Gradually, color returned to his face. His violent shivering subsided to occasional tremors. The house creaked and moaned in the wind, but inside it was warm and quiet, except for the gentle clink of spoon against bowl. Thank you. His voice was rough but clearer now. He pulled the blankets tighter around his shoulders. You're welcome, Lena said. What's your name? He shook his head slightly, eyes fixed on the floor. Better you don't know. Maria's fingers tightened on her rosary, but she remained silent. Are you sure there's no one we can call for you? Lena tried again. Once the phones are working? No. The word was final, brooking no argument. Lena noticed his gloves again, old leather, cracked and worn. Would you like to take those off now? They must be uncomfortable. His hands clenched. No. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the howling wind. The biker's shoulders were tense beneath the blankets, his posture making it clear he wouldn't answer any more questions. Lena got up quietly and took the empty soup bowl to the kitchen. When she returned, her mother had moved closer to the stranger, offering him a mug of hot tea. He accepted it with a slight nod, his gloved hands now steady enough to hold it. The three of them sat in the warm living room as the storm raged outside, each lost in their own thoughts. The biker sipped his tea slowly, his face hidden beneath his gray beard, and the shadows cast by the table lamp. Whatever his story was, whatever had brought him to that gas station on this bitter night, he clearly meant to keep it to himself. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly, marking each moment of the long night. Lena sat curled in her father's old armchair, a worn paperback novel open but unread in her lap. Near the electric heater, the biker slept deeply on their couch, his chest rising and falling beneath the pile of blankets. His beard twitched occasionally as he dreamed. Maria hadn't gone to bed either. She kept her vigil in the kitchen, the quiet whisper of her prayers mixing with the storm's diminishing fury outside. The rosary beads slipped through her fingers one by one, a familiar comfort in this strange night. Lena watched her mother through the doorway. The kitchen light cast Maria's shadow long across the linoleum floor. There was something both fragile and strong in her posture. Head bowed, shoulders straight, faith carrying her through her fears. The heater hummed steadily. Its warm glow fell across the biker's weathered face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. In sleep, he looked less threatening, more human. His leather jacket hung nearby, the skull patches barely visible in the dim light. Lena's eyes grew heavy. She fought to stay awake, but the quiet and warmth worked against her. The book slipped from her fingers. Her head nodded forward. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the walls. Lena jerked awake, disoriented. The clock showed 3 a.m. Her mother had dozed off at the kitchen table, the rosary still wrapped around her fingers. The biker was still there, still sleeping. Lena pulled her sweater tighter and settled back in the chair. Just a few more hours until dawn. She would stay awake. She would keep watch. But exhaustion won out. Despite her best intentions, sleep crept in again, deeper this time. When Lena next opened her eyes, pale gray light was seeping through the windows. The storm had passed. Her neck ached from sleeping in the chair, and her mouth felt dry. Something was different. The room felt emptier. The couch was empty. The blankets were folded neatly, her father's borrowed clothes stacked on top. The biker's frozen clothes were gone from their spot by the door. Lena sat up straight, fully awake now. Her mother still slept in the kitchen, undisturbed. The house was completely silent except for the ticking clock. On the coffee table, something caught her eye. The biker's old leather gloves lay there, carefully placed. They looked small and lonely in the dawn light. Beside them, scratched into the wood with what must have been a key, were 2 simple words. "Thank you." Lena reached out and touched one of the gloves. The leather was soft from years of wear, cracked and weathered like its owner's face had been. She lifted it, feeling its weight, wondering at the story behind why he'd left them. In the kitchen, Maria stirred. Lena heard her mother's sharp intake of breath as she realized the biker was gone. Their eyes met across the room, Maria's worried, Lena's reassuring. Outside, fresh snow blanketed everything in pristine white. There were no footprints leading away from their door, no sign of which direction the biker had taken. He had vanished as quietly as the storm, leaving only his gloves as proof he had ever been there at all. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, making the fresh snow outside sparkle like diamonds. Lena sat at the table, warming her hands around a mug of coffee while Maria busied herself making tortillas for breakfast. The familiar pat-pat-pat of dough being shaped helped calm their nerves after the strange night. "I still think we should call the police," Maria said, not looking up from her work. "Just to be safe, to let them know what happened." Lena took a careful sip of coffee. "What would we tell them, Mama? That we helped someone who was freezing to death? That we let a stranger into our home, a man with those patches?" Maria's hands stilled on the dough. "What if he comes back? What if others like him come looking? He left on his own, and he was grateful." Lena gestured toward the gloves still sitting on the coffee table in the living room. "Look how neatly he folded everything. He even thanked us." Maria wiped flour from her hands and sat down across from her daughter. "Mi amor, I know your heart is like your father's, always wanting to help, but the world isn't always kind to people who show kindness." "Papa would have stopped," Lena said quietly. "You know he would have." "Your father," Maria's voice caught. She reached across the table and squeezed Lena's hand. "Yes, he would have. But he also knew the risks of helping strangers. Remember how many times he came home with an empty wallet because someone had a sad story? And remember how many times those same people came back later to repay him, sometimes with interest?" Lena smiled at the memory. "He always said trust given freely usually comes back doubled." The kitchen fell quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a plow truck rumbled past, clearing the street. The normal rhythm of the day was returning, making last night feel almost dreamlike. "I should at least look at those gloves before throwing them away," Maria said finally, standing up. "Make sure there's nothing dangerous in them." "Mama, we're not throwing them away." Lena got up and went to retrieve the gloves herself. "He left them as a gift. That means something." She brought them back to the kitchen table, setting them carefully beside her coffee cup. In the morning light, she could see details she'd missed before. The careful stitching where they'd been repaired multiple times, the way the fingers were worn smooth from use. Lena picked up the right glove, turning it over in her hands. Something crinkled inside the cuff. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. No, not paper, plastic. A hospital bracelet, the kind they put on patients. The text was faded almost to illegibility, but she could make out a date from nearly 20 years ago, and what might have been a woman's name. The bracelet had been folded and refolded so many times that the creases were permanent, like someone had carried it for years. "What is it?" Maria asked, leaning closer. Lena handled the bracelet carefully, feeling its fragility, sensing that she held something deeply personal. I think this was important to him, something he kept close." She looked at the gloves with new eyes, understanding they weren't just a hasty thank you gift left behind by a stranger. They were something more, something valuable enough to carry memories in. Maria touched the bracelet gently with one finger, her expression softening. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we should keep these safe, in case he wants to come back for them." The kitchen grew warmer as the morning sun climbed higher, melting icy patches on the windows into rivulets that cast wobbling shadows across the floor. Lena carefully tucked the hospital bracelet back into the glove's cuff, lost in thought about its mysterious owner. Maria had just set a plate of fresh tortillas on the table when they heard it. A low rumble in the distance, like far-off thunder. But the sky outside was crystal clear, painted in winter blue. "Do you hear that?" Lena asked, straightening in her chair. Maria paused, dishcloth in hand, and nodded. "Maybe it's the snowplows coming through again?" But the sound was different, deeper, more rhythmic. It grew steadily louder, echoing off the snow-covered houses of their quiet street. The walls seemed to vibrate with its approach. Lena stood and walked to the window, pushing aside the curtain. Her coffee cup rattled against its saucer, and the spoons in the drawer began to chatter. "Dios mío," Maria whispered, coming up beside her. "What is that noise?" The rumble became a roar, and then they saw them, motorcycles, appearing first as dark spots at the end of their street. Not just a few, but dozens. No, hundreds. They came in perfect formation, filling the plowed road from curb to curb. The house shook with the collective thunder of their engines. Through the window, Lena could see neighbors emerging onto their porches, faces drawn with concern and confusion. Some pulled their children inside. Others reached for their phones. "Lena," Maria's voice quivered as she grabbed her daughter's arm. "Call the police, now." But Lena stood transfixed. The riders were pulling up in front of their house, arranging themselves with military precision. They spread out along the street in both directions, far beyond where she could see. Row after row of chrome and steel, leather and helmets, their engines creating a wall of sound that made the air itself pulse. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the engines began shutting off one by one. The roar diminished into scattered putters, then into total silence. The quiet that followed felt heavy, expectant. No one moved. The riders sat still on their bikes, faces hidden behind visors and bandanas. Lena could see patches on their jackets now, the same kinds of patches their nighttime visitor had worn. A knock at the front door made both women jump. "Don't answer it," Maria pleaded, clutching her crucifix necklace. "Please, mi hija." Another knock, firm but not threatening. Lena looked down at the gloves still sitting on the kitchen table, then back at the sea of motorcycles visible through their window. Something clicked in her mind. A connection, an understanding that pushed past her fear. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly. I think I know why they're here." Walking to the front door on shaky legs, Lena took a deep breath. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, each step echoing in the strange silence that had fallen over their usually peaceful street. She could feel her heart pounding, but somehow she wasn't afraid. Not really. The same instinct that had made her stop for a stranger in the snow was telling her to open this door. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the knob. The door swung open, and Lena found herself staring out at a sight that stole her breath away. Thousands of motorcycles stretched as far as she could see in both directions, their riders sitting perfectly still in formation. The morning sun glinted off chrome and painted metal, creating a river of light that flowed down their street. Standing directly in front of Lena was a tall figure who commanded attention without effort. His leather vest was adorned with patches that spoke of decades on the road, but it was his bearing that caught her attention, straight-backed and dignified, like a soldier at attention. He removed his helmet with careful movements, revealing a weathered face with steel-gray hair and eyes that held both strength and surprising gentleness. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the morning stillness. "Is the young woman who saved our brother home?" Lena's throat felt dry. I'm Lena Morales." The man nodded slowly, his expression softening. My name is Marcus. I speak for the Brotherhood. He gestured to the assembled riders. We came to pay our respects. Maria appeared behind Lena, one hand protective on her daughter's shoulder. Marcus acknowledged her with a respectful nod. Ma'am, we mean no harm to you or your daughter. But we have a code. When someone shows pure kindness to one of our own, especially saving a life, we acknowledge it. Properly. Another rider approached, carrying something in his arms. As he got closer, Lena could see it was a stack of firewood, neatly split and dried. Others began dismounting, each carrying different items, bags of groceries, envelopes, tools. The man you helped, Marcus continued, his voice growing softer. He's been with us for 40 years. Never asked for help, never took charity. But last night, if you hadn't stopped. He paused, emotion briefly crossing his face. Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Lena thought of the hospital bracelet hidden in the glove. Is he okay? Thanks to you, yes? Marcus smiled slightly. He's resting now. But he told us what you did. How you and your mother opened your home without question, even though everything about him probably screamed danger. Maria's grip on Lena's shoulder loosened slightly. Lena could feel her mother's tension beginning to ease. We're not here to frighten anyone, Marcus assured them, noting the nervous faces of neighbors watching from windows and porches. We just needed to show you, and your community, that kindness like yours doesn't go unnoticed, not by us. He turned to address the assembled riders, raising his voice just enough to carry. Brothers, sisters, show your respect. The sight that followed made Lena's heart skip. As one, the sea of riders removed their helmets. Then, in perfect unison, they bowed their heads. The morning sun caught the silver in their hair, the patches on their vests, the chrome of their bikes. But it was their posture that moved her most, heads bowed not in submission, but in genuine gratitude. The silence held for a long moment, broken only by the sound of winter birds and the distant drip of melting snow. Lena felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the solemnity of the moment. These were people society often feared, yet here they were, showing such profound respect for a simple act of kindness. She felt her mother's hand squeeze her shoulder again, but this time it wasn't from fear. When Lena glanced back, she saw tears in Maria's eyes, too. Marcus raised his head, meeting Lena's gaze with quiet intensity. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing past appearances to the human being underneath. That's rarer than you might think. The gathered riders raised their heads in unison, and Lena stood there, trembling slightly but unafraid, as the morning sun continued to rise over this extraordinary scene. Thousands of motorcycles, thousands of bowed heads, all because she had chosen to stop one snowy night when others would have driven past. Like a well-choreographed dance, the riders moved with purpose and respect. They formed lines, passing firewood from hand to hand until neat stacks grew against the side of the house. No one spoke above a whisper. Their boots made soft, crunching sounds in the snow as they worked. Lena watched in amazement as bags of groceries appeared on their front porch. Fresh fruit, vegetables, bread, and other essentials were arranged carefully, making sure nothing would spoil in the cold. Some riders carried tools and began quietly checking the gutters and roof, ensuring the heavy snow hadn't caused any damage. Maria stood in the doorway, her earlier fear replaced by wonder. She caught Lena's eye and shook her head slightly, as if still trying to process the scene before them. Marcus approached them again, holding several sealed envelopes. For your daughter's education, he explained to Maria, his voice gentle. No strings attached, just gratitude. Maria's hands trembled as she accepted the envelopes. "This is too much," she whispered. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "What your daughter did, stopping on a night when no one else would, bringing a stranger into your home, that kind of courage is precious. We honor it." More riders came forward, each leaving small tokens of appreciation. A hand-knitted scarf, a box of homemade cookies, a card signed by dozens of people. Each gift was presented with the same quiet dignity, accompanied by simple nods or murmured thanks. One older woman, her gray hair in a neat braid beneath her bandana, pressed a small package into Lena's hands. "For cold nights," she said with a knowing smile. It was a collection of herbal teas. As the last of the gifts were arranged, the riders began returning to their motorcycles. They moved with the same disciplined order that had marked their arrival, each person knowing exactly where to go and what to do. Marcus made one final check to ensure everything was properly placed. He turned to Lena and Maria, giving them a formal nod. "We won't forget this kindness," he said. Then, with practiced efficiency, he mounted his own motorcycle. The morning air filled with the sound of engines turning over, but they were kept at a respectful idle. No revving, no showing off, just the steady purr of well-maintained machines. Lena and Maria watched from their porch as the riders departed in perfect formation. They left in small groups, maintaining order and safety on the snow-covered roads. The rumble of engines gradually faded into the distance until only the winter silence remained. Mother and daughter stood together, surrounded by the tangible evidence of gratitude. Firewood stacked high enough to last the winter, groceries to fill their pantry, and envelopes that would ease the burden of college expenses. But it was the meaning behind these gifts that touched them most deeply. Maria reached for Lena's hand and squeezed it. They stayed like that for a long moment, watching their breath mist in the cold air, taking in the extraordinary events of the morning. The snow around their house was marked with hundreds of boot prints, the only remaining sign of their unusual visitors. The last echoes of motorcycle engines disappeared completely, leaving them in the peaceful quiet of their familiar world. Though now it felt somehow different, transformed by this unexpected display of honor and gratitude. Scene 1. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow as Lena sorted through the groceries in their kitchen. She could hear the murmur of voices outside growing louder. Curious faces peered through windows, and small clusters of neighbors gathered on the street, pointing at their house. "Did you see this?" Maria called from the living room, her voice tight with worry. She held up her phone, showing Lena a social media post that was already gaining hundreds of shares. The image showed their modest house surrounded by the sea of motorcycles from that morning. The comment section buzzed with speculation. Lena walked to the window and watched as Mrs. Peterson from across the street took photos with her phone while talking rapidly into it. "I'm telling you, Sarah, there must have been thousands of them, right here on our street." Through the thin walls of their home, snippets of conversation drifted in from the gathering crowd outside. "Never seen anything like it in all my years here," someone said. "But why this house? Why the Morales family? I heard they harbored one of them last night." Maria paced the kitchen, wringing her dish towel between her hands. "Lena, maybe we should call someone. The police, perhaps?" "Mama, we haven't done anything wrong," Lena replied, though her stomach tightened as she watched more people arriving with phones raised. The doorbell rang, making them both jump. It was Linda Watson, the neighborhood watch coordinator, her smile too bright and artificial. "Hi there. I was just wondering if you ladies might want to explain what happened this morning. Some of us are concerned about safety issues." "We helped someone in need during the storm," Lena said simply. "That's all." Linda's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, dear, when it involves certain types of people, we need to be more careful. Think about the neighborhood's reputation. Lena felt her cheeks grow hot. She started to respond, but Maria touched her arm gently, silently asking her to stay quiet. After Linda left, Lena decided to walk to the corner store for some milk they'd forgotten to buy earlier. As she passed the Thompsons' house, she overheard their teenage son talking to his friends. "My mom says they're probably involved with drugs or something. Why else would all those bikers show up?" "I heard they're part of some gang now," another boy added. "My dad says we should avoid that house." Lena's steps faltered, but she kept walking, her father's words echoing in her mind. Kindness needs no defense. When she returned home, she found Maria sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter that had been pushed through their mail slot. It was from the Homeowners Association, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss recent events. "I knew this would happen," Maria said softly, her fingers tracing the envelope's edge. "When you bring attention like this." She trailed off, looking around their small home as if memorizing it. "Your father always said to do what's right, but he never had to deal with social media and viral videos." Through their kitchen window, they could still see people driving by slowly, phones raised to capture pictures of their house. Some didn't even try to be subtle about it. "They're afraid," Lena said, putting away the milk. "They don't understand." "No, Mijita, they don't," Maria agreed, her voice heavy with worry. "But not understanding can be dangerous. People get nervous, they call authorities, they make trouble." She reached for her rosary beads, a habit she'd developed in times of stress. Sometimes kindness comes with a price. A code of honor. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when two motorcycles pulled up quietly in front of the house. Unlike the rumbling parade from that morning, these riders cut their engines immediately, approaching the front door with measured steps. Lena watched through the window as they removed their helmets. One was an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat braid, the other a tall man with kind eyes that seemed out of place against his weathered face and leather vest. Maria tensed when Lena moved to answer their knock, but this time she didn't try to stop her daughter. "Good evening," the woman said softly. "I'm Sarah, and this is Mike. We wanted to explain what happened this morning, if you'll let us." Lena nodded, stepping aside to let them in. In the living room's warm light, their intimidating appearance softened. Sarah's eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and Mike's huge hands were gentle as he declined a coffee with careful politeness. "The man you helped last night," Sarah began, "is Thomas Mason. He's been with the Brotherhood for 40 years, though he rarely speaks of his past." Mike leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "In our world, there's a code older than any of us. When someone shows true kindness, the kind that asks nothing and risks everything, we acknowledge it. Publicly." "But why so many riders?" Maria asked from her corner of the room, her hands still clutched around her rosary. Sarah's expression grew tender. "Because Tommy is loved. He's helped countless brothers and sisters through their darkest times, though he carries his own darkness." She paused, looking at Lena. When word spread that a young woman stopped for him, brought him into her home despite his appearance, despite the risk. "It touched something deep," Mike finished. "In our community, trust isn't given easily. Too many judge us by our patches and leather." Lena thought of the hospital bracelet she'd found in the glove. "He seemed so lonely." Sarah nodded slowly. "Tommy lost his way years ago. Many of us feared he'd given up. That storm last night, he shouldn't have been riding in it, shouldn't have been out there alone." "The gathering this morning wasn't just gratitude," Mike explained. "It was relief, joy. You didn't just warm him up and feed him soup. You reminded him he matters." Maria's hands had relaxed their grip on the rosary. "The groceries, the firewood." Our way of saying thank you, Sarah smiled. We take care of those who take care of our own. There are rumors starting, Lena admitted. People are afraid. Mike's expression hardened slightly. We know. That's another reason we came. You should understand. What you did? It means something to us. If anyone gives you trouble... He reached into his vest and pulled out a business card with a single phone number. Day or night, we protect our friends. Sarah stood, touching Lena's hand briefly. Tommy is a proud man. He won't come back to thank you himself, at least not soon. But know this. In 40 years, I've never seen him leave his gloves behind. Never. As they walked their visitors to the door, Lena noticed how the neighbors who had been watching earlier quickly drew their curtains or hurried inside. But now, understanding dawned in her heart. These weren't the dangerous ones. These weren't the people to fear. The two riders mounted their motorcycles with practiced grace. Before starting their engines, Sarah turned back. Your father, she said to Lena, he taught you well. They rode away as quietly as they had come, leaving Lena and Maria standing in their doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the gathering dark. A father's pain. After Sarah and Mike left, Lena sat cross-legged on her bed, turning Thomas Mason's leather gloves over in her hands. The leather was well worn, but carefully maintained, molded to the shape of working hands through years of use. Small cracks traced the palms like lines on a weathered face. In the quiet of her room, with only her desk lamp casting a warm glow, she examined the hospital bracelet she had found earlier. It had been tucked deep inside the right glove, as if hidden away from the world. The plastic was yellowed with age, its edges softened by countless touches. The text was faded but still readable. Mason, Angela, D.O.B., May 14, 1982. Admit, September 23, 2003. Lena's fingers traced the letters carefully. She remembered how Thomas had never removed his gloves while in their house, even when Maria had offered him hot soup. How his hands had trembled slightly, not just from the cold, when he'd held the bowl. She went to her laptop and opened a browser window. For a moment, her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It felt like prying into something private, something sacred. But the weight of the gloves beside her computer seemed to give her permission. The search results appeared quickly. Angela Mason, 21, killed in hit-and-run accident. The article was dated September 25, 2003. 2 days after the hospital admission date on the bracelet. Lena's throat tightened as she read. Angela had been crossing the street on a rainy evening, just blocks from the hospital where she volunteered in the children's ward. The driver was never found. She had died with her father at her bedside. The article included a photo. Angela Mason had her father's eyes, kind despite their intensity, and a smile that seemed to leap off the page. She wore a volunteer's jacket, her arm around a small patient in a wheelchair. Lena picked up the gloves again, understanding flooding through her. These weren't just gloves. They were the last gift a daughter had given her father. The leather still protected his hands, but more importantly, they held a piece of her memory. She thought of Thomas collapsed in the snow. Had he been ready to let go? Had he been seeking an end to his pain in that bitter storm? The revelation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She hadn't just saved a stranger's life. She had preserved a father's last connection to his child. Tears welled in her eyes as she carefully folded the hospital bracelet and returned it to its hiding place in the glove. This was why the Brotherhood had come in such numbers. This was why Sarah had said Thomas never left his gloves behind. The weight of it all, Thomas's loss, the Brotherhood's gratitude, the sacred trust now in her hands, pressed against her heart. In the soft lamplight, Lena held the gloves close, feeling the decades of love and grief worn into their leather. She thought of her own father, gone too soon, and how he would have stopped for Thomas, too. Some pain ran too deep for words, but kindness could still reach it. Sometimes that was enough. Scene 1. A single engine's sound. The afternoon sun struggled through winter clouds as Lena washed dishes at the kitchen sink. Steam rose from the warm water, fogging the window that looked out over their snow-covered backyard. Maria sat at the kitchen table, sorting through bills and paperwork from the previous day's unexpected gifts. A distant rumble caught Lena's attention. Different from the snowplows that had been clearing streets all morning, this sound was familiar in a new way. The deep thunder of a single motorcycle engine. "Mama," Lena called softly, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Listen." Maria looked up from her papers, tension crossing her face. The sound grew closer, then stopped in front of their house. Lena moved to the living room window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. A lone motorcycle stood in their cleared driveway, its black paint gleaming despite the gray day. The rider, still straddling the bike, removed his helmet slowly. Even from this distance, Lena recognized Thomas Mason's weathered face and silver hair. He sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the handlebars, looking at their modest house as if gathering courage. He wore different gloves now, plain black ones that seemed wrong on his hands. "It's him," Lena said, turning to her mother who had come to stand beside her. "The man from the storm." Maria's hand found Lena's shoulder, squeezing gently. Does he look angry?" "No, Mama. He looks tired. Sad, maybe." They watched as Thomas finally switched off his engine and dismounted. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone carrying a heavy weight. He adjusted his leather jacket, clean and pressed now, not frozen and snow-covered, and walked toward their front door. Lena moved to answer it before he could knock, but Maria caught her arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let him make the first move." The knock, when it came, was gentle. 3 soft taps that barely carried through the wood. Lena opened the door, Maria close behind her. Thomas stood on their porch, hat in his hands, looking more vulnerable than a man his size should be able to appear. His eyes moved between them, carrying both gratitude and apology. "Miss Morales," he said, his voice rough but quiet. "Mrs. Morales, I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," Lena assured him quickly. The cold air swirled around them through the open door. He shifted his weight, glancing at the motorcycle behind him before continuing. "I came to properly thank you both, and to explain some things that need explaining." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you'd be willing to hear me out." Maria stepped forward, surprising Lena by speaking first. "Would you like to come inside, Mr. Mason," he supplied. "Thomas Mason. And yes, ma'am, if you'd allow it. What I need to say, it's better said sitting down. Private-like." The same hint of fear Lena had seen in her mother's eyes 2 nights ago flickered briefly, but Maria squared her shoulders and opened the door wider. "Please, come in from the cold, Mr. Mason." Thomas dipped his head in thanks, carefully wiping his boots on the welcome mat before stepping inside. The worn leather of his jacket creaked softly as he moved, and Lena caught the faint scent of motorcycle oil and winter air. "Could we sit and talk?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight that spoke of more than simple conversation. "There are things you both should know." Chapter 13. The Return Scene. 2. The Gift of the Gloves. They settled around the kitchen table, where just days ago they had served soup to a frozen stranger. Now Thomas Mason sat before them, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee Maria had insisted on making. Steam curled up between them like invisible bridges. Her name was Sarah, he began, his voice carrying the weight of long-buried grief. She was 22, just like you. He nodded toward Lena, smart as a whip and twice as kind, working her way through nursing school. Maria's hand found Lena's under the table, squeezing gently. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background, marking time as Thomas gathered his thoughts. It was December, like now. She was heading home from a late shift at the hospital. His fingers tightened around the mug. Roads were clear that night, but someone ran a red light. Didn't even slow down, just left her there. Lena felt her throat tighten. The hospital bracelet she'd found in the gloves suddenly made terrible sense. By the time they got her to emergency, it was too late. Thomas's voice roughened. I was out on a run with the club. Didn't even know until I got back and saw all the missed calls. My girl was already gone. Maria crossed herself quietly, murmuring a soft prayer. Thomas acknowledged it with a small nod. Those gloves, he continued, looking directly at Lena. Sarah bought them for me that Christmas. She'd been saving up, working extra shifts, said her daddy deserved something special, something to keep me warm on winter rides. He smiled, but it was full of shadows. Never even got to give them to me herself. They were wrapped up in her apartment with a card she'd already signed. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller, more intimate, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. I wore them every winter since, Thomas said. Couldn't bear to replace them, even when they started wearing thin. They were all I had left of her, really, her last gift to me. Mr. Mason? Lena started, but he held up a hand gently. When you found me by that gas station, I was in a dark place. Darkest I'd been in years. He took a slow breath. Every December gets hard, but this year, I just couldn't shake it. Rode out into that storm not caring much if I made it back. Maria made a soft sound of understanding, the kind only mothers can make. But you stopped, he said to Lena. When nobody else would, you stopped. Brought me in from the cold, just like Sarah would have done. His voice cracked slightly. And watching you and your mother together, seeing how you care for each other. It was like getting a message from my girl. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. Sarah's Christmas card, preserved through the years. The last thing she wrote to me was, "Stay warm, Daddy. Remember, love keeps us going even in the coldest times." He looked at the empty space on the table where he'd left the gloves. That's why I left them here. Not because I forgot them, but because for the first time since Sarah died, I found someone who reminded me what those gloves really meant. They weren't just about keeping warm. They were about showing love to strangers, about bringing light into dark places. The dinner that changed everything. Maria stood at the stove, stirring a pot of her signature pozole, the rich aroma of chilies and hominy filling the kitchen. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her mind was elsewhere, processing Thomas's story. She glanced at the clock. Almost dinner time. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face Thomas, who was still sitting at the kitchen table with Lena. Would you... She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Would you like to stay for dinner? Thomas looked surprised, and Lena's eyes widened slightly. They both knew what this invitation meant coming from Maria, who had been so afraid just days ago. I make too much pozole anyway, Maria added softly, managing a small smile. My husband Jose always said I cook like I'm feeding an army. That's very kind of you, ma'am, Thomas replied, his gruff voice gentle. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Maria said firmly, finding strength in the familiar routine of hosting. Besides, Sarah would want you to eat a proper meal." The mention of his daughter's name hung in the air for a moment, but instead of deepening the sadness, it somehow made the kitchen feel warmer. Lena got up to help set the table, pulling out the good bowls her mother usually saved for special occasions. The ones with tiny painted flowers around the rim that Jose had brought back from a business trip to Mexico years ago. "These were my father's favorite," Lena explained to Thomas, as she placed them carefully on the table. "He said they made every meal feel like a celebration." As Maria ladled the steaming pozole into the bowls, she started sharing stories about Jose's love for cooking. "He once tried to make pozole himself," she said, shaking her head with a fond smile. "Forgot to drain the hominy first. What a mess." Thomas chuckled, a deep, rusty sound, as if he was remembering how. "Sarah was the same way," he offered. "First time she tried to cook for me, she made spaghetti. Forgot to add water to the pot. Nearly burned down her apartment." Lena burst out laughing, and to everyone's surprise, Maria joined in. The sound of their combined laughter seemed to chase away the shadows that had been lingering in the corners of the house. "Jose did that too," Maria exclaimed, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "With rice. The pot was ruined." They traded stories over steaming bowls of pozole, Thomas sharing memories of Sarah's childhood adventures, Maria recounting Jose's cooking disasters, and Lena adding her own mishaps to the mix. Each tale brought more laughter, transforming the kitchen into a space of joy rather than loss. The pozole grew cooler in their bowls as they talked, but no one seemed to mind. The warmth of shared memories and new connections filled them more than food could. Maria watched as Thomas's stern features softened with each story, and she felt her own fears melting away like snow in sunshine. For the first time since Jose's passing, the house rang with genuine laughter, not the polite kind they used with neighbors, or the careful chuckles they shared when trying to be strong for each other, but real, healing laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep and true. Maria caught Lena's eye across the table and saw her own revelation reflected there. Sometimes healing came in unexpected ways, through unexpected people. And sometimes it sounded exactly like laughter shared over cooling bowls of pozole. The sharp rap of knuckles on the front door cut through the peaceful morning. Lena looked up from her coffee, catching her mother's worried glance across the kitchen table. The sound came again, more insistent this time. "Police department," a male voice called out. "Please open the door." Maria's hands trembled as she set down her cup. Lena squeezed her mother's shoulder as she passed, heading for the door. Outside stood 2 uniformed officers, flanked by 3 members of the town council. Mr. Peterson, the council president, clutched a thick folder to his chest. "Good morning," Lena said, keeping her voice steady. "How can I help you?" "Miss Morales, Mr." Peterson stepped forward, his gray suit stark against the melting snow. "We've received multiple complaints about suspicious activity at this residence, the presence of known criminal elements." Officer Roberts, whom Lena recognized from the local coffee shop, cleared his throat. "We need to discuss the gathering that took place here yesterday. Several neighbors reported feeling threatened." "Threatened?" Lena's eyes widened. "No one was threatened. They came to say thank you." 2,000 motorcycles, Miss Morales," Councilwoman Hayes cut in, her thin lips pressed tight. "This isn't about gratitude, it's about public safety." Maria appeared beside Lena, her shoulders straight despite her fear. "Please, come inside where it's warm. We can discuss this properly." In the living room, the officials perched awkwardly on the edge of the couch while Maria served coffee nobody touched. "Mr." Peterson spread his papers across the coffee table, complaint forms, zoning regulations, public nuisance ordinances. "The situation is serious," he explained, tapping one document. gathering permits, noise violations, potential gang activity. They weren't being noisy, Lena protested. They were respectful. They brought us firewood and groceries. That's part of the problem, Officer Martinez said quietly. We need to know where these gifts came from. A familiar rumble approached outside. Through the window, Lena saw Thomas pulling up on his motorcycle. The officials tensed as he dismounted, his leather vest catching the morning light. Thomas knocked once before Mariah opened the door. He took in the scene with one glance, his weathered face giving nothing away. "Is this a bad time?" he asked. "Actually, sir, we'd like to ask you some questions," Officer Roberts said, standing. Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand." But first, he reached into his vest pocket, causing both officers to stiffen, but he only pulled out a small envelope. "The receipt for the groceries, and the business card for our Veterans Outreach Program. Thought you might want them for your records." Mr. Peterson blinked at the documents, his rehearsed speech forgotten. Councilwoman Hayes peered at the receipt from a local supermarket, her frown deepening. "I should go," Thomas said quietly to Lena and Maria. "Thank you again for everything." He turned to the officials. "You've got good people here, the kind who help first and ask questions later. This town should be proud of that." Before anyone could respond, he was gone, the soft purr of his motorcycle fading into the distance. The silence he left behind felt heavy with unfinished business. Lena watched the officials exchange glances, shuffling their papers. She could read the uncertainty in their faces, but also the determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 17. The Cost of Compassion. Lena slid into her usual seat in Psychology 101, trying to ignore the whispers and sidelong glances from her classmates. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification from a local community Facebook group, where someone had shared photos of the bikers outside her house. "Did you really let a Hell's Angel stay in your house?" Jessica, her lab partner, whispered as Professor Martinez began writing on the whiteboard. "He was freezing to death," Lena replied quietly, pulling out her notebook. "My dad says they're all criminals," Jessica said, scooting her chair slightly away. "Like actual murderers and stuff." Lena's chest tightened, but she focused on taking notes. The professor's voice faded into background noise as her phone kept lighting up with notifications. During a break between classes, she finally looked at the community page. "Gang activity in peaceful neighborhood. Who's protecting our children from these thugs? Time to clean up our streets." Comments piled up beneath the posts, each one more hostile than the last. Some people defended her, but their voices were drowned out by the angry majority. Someone had even posted her class schedule, suggesting others keep an eye on her. In the campus coffee shop, a group of students moved to a different table when she sat down. The barista, who usually chatted with her about classes, barely made eye contact while handing over her drink. Her phone rang. "Maria." "Mama? What's wrong?" "The bank called." Maria's voice trembled. "Someone reported suspicious deposits. They're questioning the envelopes the writers left." Lena's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. "But it's just gift money. We didn't do anything wrong." "The Homeowners Association sent a letter too. They're claiming we violated community guidelines by running an unauthorized gathering." Maria paused. "And someone spray-painted gang lovers on our garage door." Lena's hands shook as she gathered her books. "I'm coming home." "No, Mijita, stay in class. I already cleaned it off." Maria's voice softened. "But Lena, maybe we should think about moving." "Moving? But this is our home. Papa built that garage himself." "I know, mi amor. But your father would want you safe. These people, they're not just going to forget." Maria took a shaky breath. "I saw a nice house for sale near your aunt in Vermont. Far from all this." Mama, we can't let them chase us away. What we did was right. Sometimes being right isn't enough, Maria's voice cracked. I can't watch them destroy your future. The college might even— Don't say that, Lena interrupted, but fear crept into her throat. She'd worked so hard for her scholarship. Just think about it, Maria pleaded. We could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer. As Lena hung up, she noticed 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. A new post appeared on the community page. Someone claiming they'd heard from a reliable source that her house was being used to store drugs. She clicked off her phone, her father's words echoing in her mind. If someone is freezing, you don't ask who they are? But he'd never said what to do when kindness made you a target. The afternoon sun streamed through the coffee shop windows, warming the space where other students used to sit with her. Now there was just empty chairs and the weight of a decision she never thought she'd have to make. Lena lay in her childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars her father had stuck to the ceiling years ago. Their dim green light hadn't changed, but everything else had. The same window she used to watch for shooting stars now made her wonder if someone was watching back. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand. She'd finally turned off notifications after dinner. The quiet should have been peaceful, but instead it felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Down the hall, she could hear Maria's soft footsteps as she made her final check of the doors and windows, a new ritual born of fear. Rolling onto her side, Lena's gaze fell on the leather gloves resting on her desk. In the shadows, they looked ordinary, just worn leather shaped by years of use. But they carried so much more now, gratitude, loss, and consequences she never imagined. "Did I make things worse?" she whispered to the empty room. The question had been gnawing at her all day. Her simple act of kindness had rippled outward, touching not just the biker and his community, but her mother, their neighbors, even strangers on the internet. She thought about Jessica scooting away in class, about the spray paint on the garage, about Maria searching for houses in Vermont. Each memory felt like a small cut, stinging with doubt. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe being kind wasn't enough if it put everyone she loved at risk. The wind picked up outside, rattling the branches against her window. It sounded different from that stormy night, but it brought back the image of the biker collapsed in the snow. If she had driven past him like everyone else, he might have died there, alone in the cold. Would that have been better? Safer? Lena pulled her blanket tighter, remembering how the biker's eyes had lit up when he talked about his daughter, how laughter had finally broken through his grief at their dinner table. She thought about Maria's face softening as she served him seconds, the way her mother's hands had stopped shaking when she realized he was just a father who'd lost his child. But then there were the others, the angry comments, the suspicious glances, the threats barely hidden behind polite warnings. The weight of judgment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She'd always believed kindness was simple. Someone needs help. You help them. Now it felt complicated, tangled up in fear and prejudice, and things she couldn't control. Rolling onto her back again, Lena reached up toward the plastic stars, remembering her father teaching her the constellations. Sometimes the right path isn't the easy one, he used to say. But had he meant this? Watching his wife consider leaving the house he'd worked so hard to make a home? The doubt crept in like the shadows in her room, questioning every decision, every moment that led to this point. Yet beneath it, something else remained steady. The certainty she'd felt when she first stopped her car that night. It wasn't a choice made from bravery or nobility. It was simply what needed to be done, what being human meant. Lena lowered her hand, letting it rest over her heart. The two feelings sat there together, the doubt that made her want to hide, and the conviction that she'd done what was right. Neither one won out completely, but they shared the space, like stars and darkness in the night sky. The official notice arrived in a crisp white envelope with the town seal stamped in blue. Maria's hands trembled as she brought it to the kitchen table where Lena sat studying. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the worn tablecloth. "It came certified mail," Maria said softly, placing it between Lena's textbooks. "They made me sign for it." Lena picked up the envelope, its paper thick and formal beneath her fingers. Her name and address were typed perfectly, making it feel even more intimidating. She slid her finger under the flap, careful not to tear the important document inside. The letter was brief but clear. The town council had scheduled an emergency meeting to address recent events causing community concern and potential safety issues. Her stomach tightened as she read the diplomatic language that thinly veiled their true message. They wanted to discuss her decision to help the biker. "What does it say, Mija?" Maria asked, settling into the chair across from her. "They're having a town hall meeting next Tuesday evening." Lena laid the letter flat on the table. "About us. About what happened." Maria reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand. "We don't have to go. We could send a letter through a lawyer instead." But Lena was already shaking her head, remembering the quiet dignity of the bikers when they'd come to thank her. They hadn't hidden or apologized for who they were. The thought strengthened her resolve. "I need to be there," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "If they're going to talk about what happened, they should hear it from me." "Lena." Maria's worry lines deepened. "These meetings can be cruel. People say things they wouldn't say to your face, and the whole town will be watching." "That's exactly why I have to go." Lena folded the letter carefully, squaring its edges. "They're not just judging what I did. They're judging him, all of them, without even knowing their stories." She thought about the hospital bracelet, now tucked safely in her drawer with the gloves. How many people at that meeting would know about the biker's daughter? How many would see past their prejudices to recognize the grief of a father? The morning light caught the small cross hanging on their kitchen wall, making it glow briefly. It reminded Lena of something her father used to say during his Sunday school lessons. "Truth needs a voice, even when that voice shakes." Maria watched her daughter's face, recognition slowly replacing concern. She saw the same quiet determination that had made Lena stop that snowy night, the same compassion that had convinced her to open their door to a stranger. "If you go," Maria said finally, "I go too." She straightened in her chair, chin lifting slightly. "Your father would have been proud of what you did. Perhaps it's time we helped others understand why." Lena nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, focusing instead on the warmth of her mother's hand in hers. The fear was still there, of course it was, but something stronger had taken root alongside it. She would go to the meeting. She would face the stares and the whispers. And if necessary, she would stand up and explain why, on a freezing night, she had chosen kindness over caution. Not because she was reckless or naive, but because it was the only choice she could live with. The letter sat between them, no longer quite so intimidating. Outside, a motorcycle rumbled past, just an ordinary sound on an ordinary morning. But to Lena, it felt like a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones we make in a single moment of clarity. Chapter 20. Voices of Fear, Scene 1. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Lena sat between Maria and the center aisle, trying not to fidget as neighbors filed in, some averting their eyes, others staring openly. The familiar space felt different tonight, hostile almost, with its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across worried faces. Council Chairman Peterson called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. His usual friendly smile was nowhere to be seen. "We are here tonight to address serious concerns about recent events that have put our community at risk." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. 2,000 motorcycles! Mrs. Henderson from the bakery stood up without being called. Her voice shook with emotion. "My customers were afraid to come in that day. My grandson was terrified." "Order, please," Chairman Peterson said, but more voices joined in. "They could have been carrying weapons," called someone from the back. "What if they come back?" asked another. "My property values have already dropped." This from Mr. Roberts, the real estate agent who lived 3 doors down from Lena. The accusations flew faster now, each one striking like a physical blow. Lena watched people she'd known her whole life, teachers who'd praised her essays, neighbors who'd brought casseroles when her father died, transform into strangers twisted by fear. "It's not just about one night," said Linda Mason, rising slowly from her seat in the second row. She'd been Lena's Sunday school teacher years ago. "It's about precedent. What message are we sending if we allow known criminal elements to gather in our streets?" "They weren't," Lena started to say, but her voice was lost in the growing chaos. "My sister in California told me about gang violence," someone shouted. "Think about our children." "Should never have let them." Chairman Peterson banged his gavel repeatedly. "One at a time. We must maintain order. I saw them dealing drugs." A man Lena didn't recognize jumped to his feet, pointing dramatically. "Right there on the street corner." "That's a lie." Maria's voice cut through the noise, sharp with maternal fury. "I watched from my window. They never—" "You're part of the problem," someone else yelled. "Harboring dangerous—" The shouting grew louder, faces redder. Lena felt the room spinning, the familiar walls closing in. These were her neighbors, her community. How had kindness become something so frightening to them? Mrs. Collins, her old math teacher, stood up near the front. "I think we need to consider passing an ordinance against large gatherings." "And criminal organizations," added another voice. "We need police presence." "Background checks on visitors." The gavel cracked again and again, but the fear had taken on a life of its own now. Lena saw tears tracking down her mother's cheeks, though Maria's spine remained straight as steel. Just as Chairman Peterson rose to his feet, face flushed with frustration, a new sound cut through the chaos. Low at first, then growing steadily louder, the distinctive rumble of motorcycle engines approaching from all directions. The shouting died instantly. Faces turned toward the windows, pale in the evening light. The rumbling grew louder, and now there was no mistaking it. They were surrounded. The double doors at the back of the town hall opened slowly. Heavy boots echoed on wooden floors as 5 riders entered, their leather vests adorned with patches that made several people gasp. But there was no menace in their careful movements, no threat in their weathered faces as they removed their helmets with deliberate grace. The lead rider, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, approached the podium. "Chairman Peterson," she said, her voice clear and steady, "we respectfully request permission to address this gathering." The chairman gripped his gavel tighter, knuckles white. After a long moment, he gave a short nod. "My name is Sarah Reeves," she began. 23 years ago, I lost my son to leukemia. The medical bills bankrupted me. It was the riders you fear so much who organized blood drives, who paid for his treatments, who sat with me through every long night at the hospital." She gestured to a man beside her, built like a linebacker with a graying beard. He stepped forward, hands clasped respectfully. "Jim Morrison, retired Army sergeant. When my unit lost 4 men in Afghanistan, It was our brotherhood that made sure their children had Christmas presents, that their widows had shoulders to cry on. We've raised over $2 million for veterans' families." A younger man spoke next, his voice soft but carrying. "Mark Chen. I coordinate disaster relief with 3 chapters across the state. During last year's floods, we delivered supplies to elderly residents cut off by high water. We cook at homeless shelters every month. We escort abused women to court so they feel safe testifying." Each testimony landed in the stunned silence like stones in still water. The 4th rider, an older black man with kind eyes, stepped up. "Reverend James Washington. Yes, I'm both, a pastor and a rider. After tornadoes hit Jackson County, our teams were first on the scene with chainsaws and supplies. We rebuilt 3 churches that insurance wouldn't cover." The last rider moved forward, the same one who'd first approached Lena's porch that snowy morning. "We're not here to frighten anyone. We're here because one young woman showed pure kindness to a grieving father without asking who he was or what he looked like. That matters to us. That's sacred." Mrs. Henderson, who'd spoken so fearfully before, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Linda Mason sat very still, her earlier righteous anger replaced by something that looked like shame. Sarah Reeves spoke again, her voice gentle now. "Judge us by our actions, not our appearance. That's all we ask. The same courtesy Lena Morales showed our brother that night." The room remained silent as the 5 riders stepped back, a respectful formation near the wall. No one jumped up to shout accusations now. No one pointed fingers or demanded ordinances. Chairman Peterson's gavel lay forgotten on the podium as he stared at the papers in front of him, then slowly removed his reading glasses to wipe his eyes. Through tear-blurred vision, Lena saw what her neighbors were seeing. Not the scary stereotype of outlaw bikers, but people who lived by a code of service and compassion. People who showed up when others turned away. People who remembered kindness and repaid it 1,000-fold. Maria squeezed her hand, whispering a prayer of gratitude in Spanish. Around them, the fearful energy that had filled the room just minutes before transformed into something different. Something that felt like understanding beginning to take root. The room grew impossibly quiet as the senior biker stepped forward. His weathered face carried deep lines of grief, but his eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there that stormy night. In his hands, he held the leather gloves that had rested on Lena's kitchen table. "My name is Jack Miller," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Some of you may remember the hit-and-run accident on Route 16 8 years ago." He paused, swallowing hard. "That was my daughter, Sarah. She was 23. Several people shifted uncomfortably, recognition dawning on their faces. The accident had made headlines. A young teacher killed by a drunk driver who was never caught. "These gloves," he continued, running his thumb over the worn leather, "were the last birthday gift she gave me. Said her old man needed to stay warm on his bike." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wore them every day after we lost her. They were all I had left." Jack's gaze found Lena in the crowd. "That night in the storm, I wasn't just lost. I was done. Ready to let the cold take me. Didn't see much point in fighting anymore." His voice grew softer, but in the silent room, every word carried. "But this young woman, she didn't see patches or leather or an old man's mistakes. She saw someone who needed help." Maria's grip on Lena's hand tightened as Jack continued. "In my daughter's last letter to me, she wrote about wanting to make a difference in people's lives. Said that's why she became a teacher." He held up the gloves. "When Lena stopped that night, it wasn't just my life she saved. She gave me back my daughter's dream, showing kindness without question, seeing the person behind the pain." He walked slowly toward where Lena sat, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "I left these gloves that morning because I finally understood what Sarah had been trying to teach me. That love isn't something you hold on to until it hurts. It's something you pass on. Standing before Lena now, Jack held out the gloves. These belong with someone who understands that. Someone who reminds me so much of my Sarah. Not in looks, but in heart. Lena stood, tears streaming down her face. Her hands trembled as Jack placed the gloves in them, his own eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for bringing light back into an old man's darkness, for showing this town what my daughter always knew, that kindness doesn't need explanations or conditions. It just needs to be given." The silence in the room had transformed from tense to reverent. Chairman Peterson wiped his eyes openly now. Mrs. Henderson, who had been so vocal about dangerous elements earlier, was sobbing quietly into her handkerchief. Looking down at the gloves in her hands, Lena felt their weight, not just of leather and memories, but of trust and redemption, of a father's love transformed into a gift, of a daughter's spirit living on through simple acts of compassion. Chairman Peterson cleared his throat, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The town hall meeting room remained hushed. The earlier hostility dissolved into something softer, more reflective. He shuffled the papers in front of him, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I believe," he said finally, his voice slightly hoarse, "that we've heard what we needed to hear tonight." He glanced at the other council members, who nodded in agreement. "The safety concerns raised have been—" He paused, looking directly at Jack, and then at Lena. "Thoroughly addressed." Officer Martinez, who had been one of the most vocal critics, stood up from his seat. "If I may, Mr. Chairman?" At Peterson's nod, he turned to face the crowd. "As head of community safety, I think we owe Miss Morales and her mother an apology. We let fear cloud our judgment." The tension that had filled the room for hours continued to dissolve. Mrs. Thompson, who lived 2 doors down from the Morales family, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Several other council members exchanged meaningful looks. "I move to formally close this inquiry," Councilwoman Rivera said, her voice firm. "And perhaps we should consider how to better support the kind of community spirit Miss Morales has demonstrated." "Seconded," came multiple voices at once. Chairman Peterson managed a warm smile. "Motion carried. This meeting is adjourned." He tapped his gavel gently, the sound barely necessary in the quiet room. As people began to rise from their seats, Lena stood still, the leather gloves cradled in her hands. Maria touched her daughter's shoulder, pride replacing the worry that had lined her face for days. Mrs. Henderson approached first, her earlier accusations forgotten. "Lena, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I was wrong, so very wrong. Can you forgive an old woman for jumping to conclusions?" Before Lena could respond, Mr. Chen from the grocery store stepped forward. "My father always said you can judge a community by how it treats strangers," he said quietly. "You showed us all what that really means." One by one, neighbors who had whispered behind closed doors now came forward. Some offered quiet apologies, others simply squeezed her hand or nodded respectfully. Even teenage Tommy Parker, who had posted scared emojis on social media about the biker invasion, shuffled up with his mother. "That was pretty brave," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "What you did that night." The bikers remained respectfully at the back of the room, watching as the community that had feared them now demonstrated its capacity for change. Jack stood among them, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched understanding replace fear, connection, replace division. Mrs. Rodriguez, Lena's former high school teacher, approached with tears in her eyes. "You always were my best student," she said softly. "Not because of grades, but because you understood what really matters." She turned to Maria. "You and your husband raised her well." Maria squeezed her daughter's hand, her voice thick with emotion. Her father would be so proud. The stream of neighbors continued, each interaction healing something that had been broken in the community's trust. Some brought up memories of times the bikers had helped during floods or fundraisers. Others admitted their own prejudices with newfound humility. Through it all, Lena stood steady, accepting each apology and acknowledgement, with the same quiet grace that had led her to stop on that snowy night. The gloves in her hands reminded her that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Choices made not because they're easy, but because they're right. The morning sun streamed through Lena's bedroom window, casting warm patterns on her desk where she sat studying. A week had passed since the town hall meeting, and the rhythm of daily life had gradually returned. She glanced at the leather gloves, now carefully placed beside her father's old photo on her bookshelf. The past few days had brought subtle but meaningful changes. Mrs. Thompson had started leaving fresh-baked bread on their porch. Mr. Chen now insisted on giving them extra produce from his grocery store, saying it would just go to waste anyway. Officer Martinez made a point of waving whenever he drove past their house on patrol. Lena traced her finger along the textbook page, but her mind wandered back to that snowy night. The memory felt different now, less about fear and more about certainty. She remembered how clear the choice had felt, despite every reason to drive past. "Mija," Maria called from downstairs. "Come help me with these boxes." In the kitchen, Maria was sorting through donations for the warming shelter she'd decided to start. Local businesses had begun dropping off blankets, coats, and supplies. The idea had come to her during one sleepless night, inspired by how a single act of warmth had transformed their community. "I keep thinking about what your father used to say," Maria said, folding a blanket. "If someone is freezing, you don't ask who they are." He knew, didn't he? He understood that kindness doesn't need conditions. Lena nodded, helping her mother organize the supplies. "I think that's why the bikers responded the way they did. They weren't just thanking me. They were showing everyone that people are more than their appearances." Through the window, they could see Tommy Parker and his friends clearing their driveway of leaves. The teenagers had shown up that morning, uninvited but eager to help. They'd been doing similar good deeds all around the neighborhood lately. "You know what's funny?" Lena said, sorting through warm socks. "Everyone keeps calling what I did brave, but it didn't feel brave at the time. It just felt necessary." Maria paused her folding, looking at her daughter with soft eyes. "That's exactly what makes it brave, mi amor. You saw what was necessary when others didn't want to look." The kitchen radio played quietly in the background as they worked, sunlight warming the room that had once been filled with such tension. Lena thought about Jack, about his daughter, about how grief and love could twist together into something that looked like darkness to those who didn't understand. "I've been thinking about changing my major," Lena said carefully. "Maybe social work instead of business. After everything that's happened?" Maria smiled, unsurprised. "You want to help more people find their way home?" "Something like that," Lena agreed. "I always thought small kindnesses were just that, small. But now I see how they ripple outward, touching lives we never even know about." She picked up one of the donated coats, feeling its warmth. The simple act of stopping her car that night had changed not just Jack's life, but had transformed their entire community's understanding of itself. It had shown them that compassion wasn't naive. It was the bravest choice they could make. The autumn light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in its beam. Outside, the sound of teenagers laughing mixed with the rustle of leaves. Inside, mother and daughter continued their work, preparing to keep others warm in the coming winter. Lena understood now that kindness wasn't just about the moment it was given. It was about all the moments that followed, all the lives it touched, all the changes it inspired. Like ripples in still water, reaching farther than the eye could see.